regret. It is a word that makes almost everyone pause. At some point in life, each of us has looked back and wished that we could change one decision, one word, or even one small action. It is like a shadow that follows us, whispering what could have been. Alongside regret lives its twin, something far brighter, yet often harder to grasp: forgiveness. Together, these two experiences shape human hearts more deeply than almost anything else. But why do we stumble into regret in the first place? Is it pride when we think we cannot be wrong? Is it stubbornness when we refuse to bend even a little for those who love us? What happens when pride blinds us until it is too late? Sometimes by the time we realize how our actions hurt others, the damage is already done. That is the heavy truth that makes regret such a painful teacher. And still, forgiveness exists. Sometimes we need to forgive others who failed us. Other times we need the far harder act of seeking forgiveness from the very people we wounded. Without this, life feels like carrying stones in a basket that grows heavier day by day. Forgiveness is the moment we finally set those stones down and allow our hearts to breathe again. This is the story of one young woman. She was intelligent, full of energy, and blessed with people who cared for her. Yet she carried pride like a crown and believed only her way was right. She did not notice the bridges she was burning until the smoke rose too high. By the time her heart began to ache with regret, she feared that forgiveness was too far away. Her journey was not easy, but it would change her forever. Our story begins with a girl whose early years looked, on the surface, unremarkable. She was born in a modest town, where streets were dusty in the summers and quiet in the winters. Life there was simple. Neighbors greeted each other on their morning walks. Children played until the sun dipped low, and families shared food whenever they could. From the very start, she showed signs of being different. While most children were content with games, she wanted to know the reasons behind everything. Why does rain fall? Why do people cry? Why do some people have more while others have less? Her curious questions made her parents smile with pride, but deep inside they also worried. Curiosity, after all, gives wings. But wings can sometimes carry you into storms instead of safe skies. As she grew older, her personality became even more striking. She was clever. Teachers admired her sharpness. Friends often looked to her for answers, and her quick thinking allowed her to solve problems others struggled with. If there was ever a contest, she wanted to win it. If there was an argument, she wanted the last word. In her heart, she had the gift of determination, but clinging too tightly to that determination slowly shaped into something else. Though she loved her family in her own way, she disliked being corrected. When her mother advised her to be patient, she would frown. When her father asked her to be gentle with her words, she would shrug and walk away. In her young mind, kindness often felt like weakness, and pride seemed like strength. She did not know how costly this belief would one day become. Yet her family never stopped caring. They cheered her smallest achievements. They laughed at her dramatic speeches when she declared she would one day change the world. And truthfully, she did have a spark, a gift, something that could have carried her far. But gifts, if not cared for, can twist into burdens. The villagers noticed her too. They smiled when she walked by, recognizing a girl filled with promise, smart, bold, unafraid of speaking her truth. She became known as someone who could not easily be defeated. On the outside, it looked like strength. On the inside, it was a seed of pride quietly waiting to grow. At that time, however, she could not see the dangers ahead. In the freshness of youth, she believed the world bent around her will. She could not imagine that choices made from stubbornness would one day leave her heart aching with regret. For now, her life was filled with sunshine, laughter, and the exciting promise of the future. Everything seemed to be in her hands. But as every story reminds us, light untested by darkness does not yet know its own strength. And darkness, one way or another, always arrives. As the young woman stepped into her teenage years and early adulthood, the seeds planted in her childhood began to show their fruit. She was no longer just the curious little girl who asked questions. She was now a confident young woman, bold in her speech and certain of her views. And while confidence is a gift, when guided by pride, it can become a blade that wounds others without even trying. Her first choices seemed small. A disagreement with a friend, a harsh reply to her parents, a refusal to admit she was wrong in small matters, a missing homework assignment. a careless mistake in chores, a fight she could have avoided. At the time, it all looked harmless. After all, everyone makes mistakes, and every young person pushes against the boundaries set by family and community. But for her, the difference was that she rarely apologized. She believed apologies were unnecessary signs of weakness. To her, winning an argument mattered more than keeping peace in relationships. People noticed. Her closest friend, who once shared secrets and laughter with her, began to hesitate before speaking. "You never really listen," once whispered the friend after a long silence. It stung her for a moment, but instead of reflecting, she grew defensive. "I know what I'm doing. You just cannot understand me," she snapped. The friend's eyes filled with hurt, but she looked away, too proud to soften her words. Her parents, too, began to taste the sharpness of her pride. When her mother kindly suggested she rest instead of staying up late, she responded with sarcasm. When her father warned her against rushing into choices, she called him old-fashioned and laughed. Inside, they worried but remained patient, hoping she would learn when life tested her. But she mistook their silence for weakness, and their patience for ignorance. Beyond her home, other choices revealed this same flaw. She had a natural ability for leadership, and soon she began leading projects at school and in the community. But in her hands, leadership became control. She pushed her teammates too hard, ignored their ideas, and accepted credit for things others had helped to build. Some admired her success from afar, not knowing what the people close to her endured. Others quietly stepped away, unwilling to remain in her shadow. Still, life often rewards determination, at least for a while. She achieved recognition. Teachers praised her speeches. Neighbors spoke of her as a girl going somewhere important. The illusion of success blinded her more. Each achievement inflated her pride, making her feel unstoppable. She believed her path was clear, paved by her intelligence and fueled by her determination. Yet underneath, cracks had begun to form. The people who loved her most began feeling unappreciated. Relationships weakened one by one, like threads snapping quietly until only a thin rope remained. She did not notice, or perhaps she chose not to notice, pride often creates a wall where no outside voices can be heard. One evening, her younger brother tried to ask her for help with his schoolwork. Instead of guiding him patiently, she lectured him, mocking his mistakes. His eyes filled with quiet tears as he closed the book and whispered, "It's all right. I'll ask someone else." For a brief second, she saw the disappointment in his face, but she shook it off. "One day he'll thank me for teaching him to be strong," she thought to herself. She did not recognize the difference between strength and harshness, between honesty and cruelty. To her, everything she said and did felt justified, because she believed in her own vision of what was right. Her world still looked intact. People hadn't completely turned from her yet, and opportunities still came her way. But the foundation of trust was fragile now, like glass waiting for one hard blow to shatter it completely. The path had been set. Her prideful choices would soon return to her, carrying lessons she never wanted to learn in a way she could no longer ignore. Because when pride leads, regret always follows close behind. The consequences arrived for a while. She believed her path was straight and smooth. She moved through her days with energy, accomplishing tasks and earning praise from those who only saw her from a distance. Success has a strange way of hiding the quiet losses happening at home and within hearts. But the truth is that pride always takes more than it gives, and slowly, the cost of her attitude came due. The first loss was small. That childhood friend, once her closest companion, grew weary of always being corrected, always being dismissed. One day, the friend simply stopped calling. At first, she barely noticed. People drift apart, she told herself. But then, when she wanted to share some good news and realized she had no one to tell it to, an uneasy silence crept in. The truth was simple. She had pushed her friend away long before the friendship broke. At home, the consequences spoke louder. Her parents, though loving, grew quieter around her. Instead of advising her, they began to nod politely, not because they agreed, but because they were tired of being mocked for caring. Once she would find her mother waiting at the door to ask about her day. But now, the door often stayed closed. Once her father patiently explained the world to her, but now he busied himself with his work, leaving her to figure things out on her own. She told herself she was independent, but deep inside a small ache grew. It is cold to live in a house where words are careful and smiles are rare. The greatest consequences, however, came when she stepped into wider opportunities. She wanted to lead, to shine, and at first she succeeded. But the more she demanded from others without offering kindness, the more they resisted. A group she was leading eventually broke apart, weary of her constant control. The project collapsed, and although she tried to explain that the others were lazy or careless, whispers followed her. She doesn't know how to work with people. The whispers hurt her more than she admitted. Still, her pride would not allow her to accept responsibility. She told herself that people were jealous, that they feared her talent, that they could not keep up with her vision. But each new endeavor ended with fewer companions, fewer people willing to help. Slowly, she was building a reputation not of genius but of arrogance. Her family's patience waned further. Arguments that once ended with sighs now ended with silence. One evening, her father finally spoke words that left her trembling. "You are not the person we raised you to be. You have strength, but without humility it will destroy you." Instead of hearing this warning, she shouted back, accusing him of not understanding her dreams. Later in the night, when his words echoed in her mind, she buried them under anger. But anger cannot protect the heart forever. One day, her brother came home with a small prize he had won in a local contest. His face glowed with pride. He ran to show her, expecting at least a smile. Instead, she brushed it aside. "That's nothing compared to what I used to win. You need to aim higher." His shoulders fell. He placed the prize quietly on the shelf and walked away, his excitement crushed. Only an hour later, when she found him sulking in the corner, did she feel a sting of guilt. But by then, the damage was done. Hearts bruise softly, yet they remember for a long time. Other consequences arrived in ways even she could not deny. Some doors she expected to open for her remained closed. Teachers who had once admired her now favored other students who worked with humility. Neighbors who used to praise her spoke more often about her rudeness than her talents. She began to notice the long pauses in conversations, the brief looks between people who thought she did not see. It was not only her family and friends she was losing. It was respect. Late at night, when the house was dark and quiet, she sometimes lay awake, wrestling with thoughts she refused to share. Was she truly right, or was something deeply wrong? Why did it feel like every step forward pushed people farther away? And why, when she succeeded, did her victories feel empty? Regret had not yet fully taken hold of her, but it was circling. Like clouds gathering before a storm, the signs were clear to everyone except her. She was alone more often. Achievements felt hollow, and behind her pride lived a fragile heart that had no one to lean on when the applause faded. In one final attempt to ignore the truth, she convinced herself that others simply did not matter. "All I need is myself," she told her reflection one morning. But even as she said it, the words tasted bitter, because she knew in the deepest part of her heart that no one climbs through life alone, and no throne built on pride lasts forever. The consequences had arrived, and they were not passing lightly. The choices she made were now shaping the world around her in ways she could not escape. And soon, the full weight of regret would come crashing down. The moment of regret, it happened quietly, not with an explosion, but with silence. That is often how regret arrives, softly, like a whisper. And then suddenly, like a thunderclap in the heart. One evening, after a long day that had offered her no success and no comfort, she sat alone in her room. The world outside was moving on, neighbors talking in the street, children laughing in the distance, but inside, all was still. She looked around and noticed what she had been avoiding for months. An empty phone with no calls, a desk without notes of encouragement, a life stripped of the warm presence of friends or family. For the first time, she could not explain away the silence. She could not pretend that people just didn't understand her. The evidence was too clear. She was alone because she had pushed everyone away. Her eyes fell on a shelf where her younger brother's little prize still rested. She remembered his face when she brushed it aside, remembered how his excitement had drained like water from a broken jar. A sharp pain pierced her chest. All at once, memories flooded in. The hurt face of her friend, the weary eyes of her parents, the whispered complaints of people she had led. She tried to run from these memories before, but now they surrounded her. Regret is heavier than anger, heavier even than failure. It pressed down on her shoulders until she lowered her head and whispered into the darkness, "What have I done?" Tears came, hot and uninvited, sliding down her cheeks until she covered her face with her hands. She had believed herself to be strong, unshakable, unstoppable. But in that moment, her strength shattered. For the first time in years, she admitted the words that pride had locked away. I was wrong. She thought of her parents, who had warned her with kindness, and how she had repaid them with sharpness. She thought of her friends who had trusted her, only to be dismissed. She thought of her community, who had hoped in her, only to be disappointed. Every memory was like another stone added to her heart. And here was the cruelest truth about regret. You cannot turn back time. You cannot unsay words spoken in anger. You cannot unbreak hearts wounded by pride. What is done, and regret sits beside you saying, now you must live with it. That night was long. She sat by the window, staring at the moon, wondering when exactly she had gone so far off the path. She felt like a traveler who had walked boldly into the forest, only to look around and realize she was lost, with no map and no companion. But as she sat in her sorrow, another thought crept in, soft but persistent. Is it too late? Could forgiveness ever reach her? Could the people she had hurt ever allow her back into their hearts? Or had she burned the bridges so completely that even the ashes were gone? The questions gave her no answers, only more tears. Yet, in a small way, they were the beginning of something new. For the first time, she stopped defending herself. For the first time, she stopped blaming others. In the silence of regret, a seed of humility broke the surface. The road of pride had led her here, into darkness. But perhaps, just perhaps, another road still existed, one she had refused to take before. The road of forgiveness. The struggle for forgiveness. The morning after her long night of tears, she woke with swollen eyes and a heart heavy as stone. Regret had cracked her pride. But cracking pride is only the first step. What came next was far more difficult. She had to face the people she had hurt. For hours, she stared at her reflection in the mirror, practicing words she had never allowed herself to say. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please forgive me. Each time the words reached her lips, her voice broke or her pride whispered, why should you lower yourself? They hurt you too. She had to battle that whisper again and again. Pride does not die easily. It fights with all its strength, even when it has already led us to a lonely place. But regret gave her courage, and humility gave her a path forward. She began with her younger brother. He was in the room with his small prize still resting on the shelf, gathering dust. Can I talk to you? She asked softly. He looked at her with guarded eyes. She sat beside him, and for the first time in years, her voice trembled with honesty. I shouldn't have spoken to you the way I did. Your prize was important. I was wrong to dismiss it. I hurt you and I am sorry. Silence. He looked at her for a moment, then turned away with a shrug. It doesn't matter. His words were short, but his tone carried the ache of a wound still fresh. Later, after she left the room, she heard him crying quietly. It was her first lesson. Apologies may open doors, but pain does not vanish in an instant. Next, she turned to her parents. Sitting before them, she felt smaller than she had in years. Her mother's eyes were kind but cautious. Her father's hands rested in silence, waiting. I have been foolish, she admitted, tears breaking through her voice. I thought I was strong by ignoring your advice, but I was only proud. I mocked your love and I disrespected your care. I see it now. I was wrong. Her mother's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment the girl thought she would be forgiven immediately. But her father spoke with firmness. Words are easy. Change is hard. We can forgive you, but you must live differently, or we will be here again. Those words stung. She wanted instant relief, the soft blanket of full forgiveness. But forgiveness is not instant. It is like a tree planted quickly with words, but only grown with time, watered by consistent actions. She began, then, the long and painful process of rebuilding. With her brother, she listened instead of lecturing. She praised instead of dismissing. When he failed at something, she sat beside him, not above him, helping him with gentleness. At first, he pushed her away, suspicious of her sudden kindness. But slowly, his walls thinned. One afternoon, when she congratulated him sincerely on a small accomplishment, He smiled shyly, the first sign that healing was possible. With her parents, the effort was deeper. She obeyed their advice without rolling her eyes. She helped in the home without being asked. She practiced speaking with respect, even when she disagreed. Each day was a test of her humility. Each night she wondered if her efforts were enough. Forgiveness felt like a mountain, and she was climbing it inch by inch. The hardest trial, however, was with her friends and community. Approaching them was terrifying. She feared their laughter, their rejection, even their disbelief. Who would believe I have changed, she thought, when my past is filled with pride? Her first attempt was a failure. She went to an old friend, her voice trembling with apology. But the friend shook their head. It's too late. I tried for years, but you never cared. I don't trust this sudden change. Those words cut like a blade. She walked away, her heart sinking, wondering if regret had come to her too late. But she refused to stop. Over and over she tried again. If someone needed help carrying a heavy load, she volunteered. If children were struggling with lessons, she sat with them patiently. She spoke with kindness where once she had spoken in harshness. Some people ignored her efforts, others doubted, but she persisted. Slowly, whispers in the village shifted. She was no longer the arrogant one, but the girl who seems different now. Still, not everyone forgave her quickly. Some wounds were deep, and restoration takes time. That was the hardest lesson of all. Forgiveness cannot be demanded. It can only be invited by humility, consistency, and love. At night, she often collapsed into bed weary, thinking, have I done enough? Will they ever see me differently? But in those moments of doubt, she reminded herself, this journey was not simply about being forgiven. It was about becoming the kind of person who was worthy of forgiveness. Weeks passed. The broken bonds began to mend, thread by fragile thread. The warmth of laughter returned to her home. She found herself listening more often than speaking, quietly serving instead of loudly leading. And though some still held their distance, her heart grew lighter with every step of the journey. Forgiveness, she learned, is not one moment, it is a path. And though the path was steep and rocky, she was finally walking in the right direction. The power of true forgiveness. Forgiveness did not arrive all at once. It came slowly, like the sunrise after a long dark night, first a faint glow on the horizon, then a spreading warmth that eventually touched everything. The first moment of true forgiveness came from her younger brother. One afternoon, she found him sitting at the table, papers spread out, struggling with his schoolwork. She hesitated, almost afraid to interrupt, afraid he might reject her again. But then, gathering courage, she sat beside him. Do you want me to help this time? She asked cautiously. He looked at her with a mixture of doubt and hope. Then, without a word, he slid one of the papers toward her. That simple action, the trust in his eyes, the invitation in his silence, was more powerful than 1,000 speeches. It was his way of saying, I forgive you. She helped him patiently, gently explaining mistakes, praising small successes. When he finally solved the problem and grinned proudly, she hugged him tightly. This time her words were not harsh or dismissive. They were soft and full of love. I'm proud of you. For the first time in years, his laughter rang across the house. Her parents, too, began to soften. Trust is not rebuilt in an instant, but they could see her efforts were not shallow. Weeks of consistent humility proved her sincerity. Her father one evening placed his hand on her shoulder. His voice was steady but kind. We see you trying. We see that you are changing. Those words, though simple, became like water to a thirsty soul. Her mother, who had prayed silently for her return, wept quietly the first time her daughter offered to help in the kitchen without being told. They cooked side by side, and as she sliced vegetables, she murmured, I am glad you are back. The girl wiped her eyes quickly with her sleeve, but the tears were not of regret this time. They were of gratitude. The biggest surprise, however, came from the community. At first, people mocked her attempts to be kinder. She's pretending, some whispered. She'll go back to her old ways. But actions build reputations, and over time, her actions were impossible to ignore. She carried water for an elderly neighbor without being asked. She taught struggling children to read and encouraged them patiently instead of boasting about her own intelligence. When disagreements happened, instead of demanding the last word, she held her silence and listened first. One by one, the doubts faded. Even those who mocked her began to respect her again. Then one day, the friend she had lost so long ago crossed her path. For a moment, both stood frozen. Memories of laughter and betrayal hung heavy between them. The friend looked away, ready to keep walking, but with trembling steps she approached. "I know I hurt you," she said softly. "I cannot undo the past, but I wish I could. If you have even a little space in your heart, please. Forgive me." Her friend stood silent, eyes moist with emotion. Finally, with a shaky breath, they replied, "Do you know how many nights I cried because of your words? Do you know how long I waited for you to care?" The young woman bowed her head, ashamed. "I failed you, and I don't deserve your kindness, but I will spend my life proving I can be better." Something broke in that silence, not broken like destruction, but broken like a seed opening. Her friend stepped closer and whispered, "I don't know if things will ever be the same, but I forgive you." The young woman wept openly, her tears falling onto her friend's hands as they embraced. Forgiveness, she realized, does not erase pain, but it begins to heal it. From then on, change was no longer only inside her, it was visible in her relationships, her home, her village. People had once seen her as arrogant, then as broken. Now they saw her as someone who had fallen but risen again, carrying humility like a lantern in her hands. And she learned the most powerful truth. Forgiveness is not a gift given only to the guilty, it is also a gift to the forgiver. When her brother forgave her, his laughter returned. When her parents forgave her, peace returned to their home. When her friend forgave her, joy returned between them. Forgiveness, she saw, is freedom for both hearts. Her pride had once isolated her, but forgiveness built bridges where pride had burned them. And those bridges were stronger than before, built not on arrogance but on grace. That was the power of true forgiveness. Reflection and wisdom time has a way of softening even the sharpest memories. As months passed and her life slowly found balance, the young woman often sat quietly in the evenings, reflecting on the road she had traveled. The house, once heavy with silence, was now filled with laughter again. The village that had whispered behind her back now welcomed her with respect. Yet she knew that the true victory was not in gaining approval from others. It was in the transformation of her own heart. She thought of the moments when regret nearly crushed her, the nights of tears, the weight of guilt that seemed unbearable. At the time, she believed regret was her enemy, but now she saw it differently. Regret had been her teacher. Without it, she might never have recognized the depth of her mistakes, never have turned back toward humility, never discovered the healing power of forgiveness. Regret had broken her, but only so she could be rebuilt stronger. And forgiveness, how unexpected, how beautiful it had been. Before, she had thought forgiveness was weakness, something that favored others and left you smaller. But she now understood the truth. Forgiveness does not weaken, it strengthens. It frees the forgiver from bitterness and frees the guilty from despair. It is not about erasing the past, but about choosing a different future. Looking back, she realized that life is not measured only by successes or failures, but by the courage to grow, to change, and to begin again when we fall. Pride had isolated her, but humility brought her home to her family, her friends, her community, and to herself. Her reflections became quiet promises she whispered into her heart. Never again let pride guide my steps. Never again choose harshness over kindness. Never again forget the gift of forgiveness. Her story is one of many, but its lesson belongs to us all. Every human heart, no matter how strong or carefully guarded, knows what it means to regret. We have all spoken a word too sharp, stood too firmly in pride, or turned our backs on someone who loved us. And we have all felt the heavy silence that follows. But her journey reminds us that regret does not have to be the end. Regret can be the beginning, the painful but necessary step that guides us to change, to humility, and finally, to forgiveness. Without regret, we might never see our own faults. Without forgiveness, we might never heal from them. Forgiveness is not easy. It takes courage to admit wrong, patience to rebuild trust, and strength to let go of bitterness. Yet the young woman's life shows that even when bridges are burned, they can be built again. Not quickly, not without effort, but stronger than before. Perhaps as you hear this story, a face comes to your mind, someone you hurt, or someone who hurt you. Maybe the wound is old, or maybe it still bleeds fresh. Regret may whisper that it is too late, but the truth is this. as long as we breathe. It is never too late to take one small step toward forgiveness. Her life is proof that we are not defined by our mistakes, but by what we choose to do after them. And those who choose humility, kindness, and forgiveness leave behind more than memories of pain. They leave behind hope. That is the gift she discovered. The lesson she leaves for us: regret is the teacher, forgiveness is the healer, and together they lead us toward love.